Я было все терпеть. Было все для вас делать.
Hi. You're not having the best day. You've entered the home of a prostitute punisher, a sex maniac and an old pervert. Don't feel bad, you have a chance to survive. To do this, you must not be stupid, not slow down, but quickly and clearly fulfill any wish or order. If you want to live, lie down and do what they want. This is how Alexei Lugovoy began his address to the victims. He was the head of a shipping company with an excellent reputation in the community. But within the walls of his home, he was a sexual sadist with a twisted imagination. His victims were street prostitutes, the most disenfranchised people in the early 2000s. He organized a gang of perverts consisting of 4 men and 1 woman. The police counted about 30 women as his victims. They weren't just locked up and raped for weeks, they were subjected to inhumane torture. And the gruesome orgies were videotaped. Police say this footage is nothing compared to what they've seen on the job. The maniac and his accomplices were caught thanks to one victim, Zhenya. She was just 17 years old. On March 27, 2002, 2 young men drove up to where the prostitutes were standing and picked out young Zhenya. Without further ado, she sat down in the back seat of the car. The boys promised to bring her back later that night, but no one saw Zhenya that night or the next morning. Zhenya was taken to a house outside the city. At first she did not suspect anything, everything was as usual. A group of 3 women and 4 men were relaxing with cigarettes and vodka. 2 of the women, she later found out, were also prostitutes. Both were a little over 20 years old. They had been held here for 3 days. But Zhenya did not know about it yet, so he was not particularly afraid. The 3rd woman present, 50-year-old Yekaterina Ustinova, was an old and loyal friend of Alexei Lugovoy. The men at the table were Lugovoy himself and his younger friends. Lugovoy took Zhenya to the other half of the house. When she crossed the threshold of the cold room, she felt that she was in trouble. It was the silver room. Zhenya immediately remembered the scary stories of her friend with whom she rented an apartment. The friend said that a few months ago she had spent 10 days in a room whose walls were covered with silver-colored insulation. She and other women were raped and severely beaten. Zhenya took a closer look. In the middle of the room there were 2 metal bars with a crossbar on which various hooks were hung. There was an iron couch and 2 armchairs in the room. Chains were attached to the gallows, and handcuffs, whips, ropes, and old clothes littered the floor. "Sit down and read." Lugovoy pushed a pamphlet with colorful pictures into the girl's hands. "You have 1 hour. Think carefully how you will behave." Then he left. Zhenya was not afraid, but after reading the paper with the rules, numb. Lugovoy had come up with a kind of contract he made with his victims. Of course, the victims had no choice. "Hello. You came to see me. Actually, things are not as sad as they seem at first glance. It's up to you. When you sign a contract, you quietly and peacefully go to work and diligently fulfill all its clauses. If you do not, you will be like these girls." What followed was a series of photos of smiling, full-breasted girls in t-shirts and sundresses. All photos, of course, were taken from the internet. If you don't want to sign a contract, you can be accused of possession of drugs, for example. And that is already an article. And prison. You already have 10 grams of heroin in your purse or jacket. Then you will be like these girls. Then there were pictures of naked women in handcuffs posing with their arms and legs wide open against the backdrop of prison walls and barred windows. Then the warnings became harsher and harsher. The pictures became bloodier and bloodier. If you don't want to sign the contract and you don't want to live, just tell me. And you won't live. And the last series of photos showed only women's corpses. The contract Lugovoy insisted on signing was called a private work contract. In it, the master specified the duties of his maid: to meet him completely naked, in a certain pose, to obey him unconditionally, to remain silent. And if she wanted to say something, to stick out her tongue. Greet the master with the words, "The maid is ready to fulfill her duties. I'll do my best, I swear." And Lugovoy was sure to get the victim's signature. It was an integral part of the game. After signing the contract, Zhenya took off all her clothes and jewelry, put them in a bag and waited for her employer. And Lugovoy had to get the victim's signature. It was part of the game. After the contract was signed, Zhenya took off all her clothes and jewelry, put them in a bag, and waited for her employer. Zhenya could not talk about what happened next without tears. And all the other women who passed through Lugovoy's torture chamber and then the interrogation room sobbed. The door of the torture chamber creaked open, and two girls who had been sitting in the kitchen crawled into the room on all fours. Lugovoy and his comrades wanted to admire the naked horses. After the prisoners were lined up, they were ordered to make love in front of the camera. The perverts decided to rape Zhenya with a twist. First, the four men played elephants with Zhenya, they said. The essence of the game is that they put a gas mask on the girl's head. They choked her until she turned blue. Then it was the turn of the metal rack with hooks. Zhenya, and then other prisoners, were hung from the hook by their hair, their hands and feet were tied, they were beaten with whips and metal rods, raped in the most brutal way, and electric shocks were applied to their bodies. During the day, the prisoners moved around the house on all fours. Their duties included preparing food for the gentleman's company, cleaning the house, and washing dishes. The maids themselves were fed once a day with potatoes and bread. The girls slept in the torture room, which was not heated. They were not allowed to go outside, they were placed on a bucket. And they were strictly forbidden to talk to each other. They were beaten mercilessly for every word. On the fourth day, Zhenya couldn't stand it any longer and cried out, "Give me a knife, I'll kill myself." Seeing that the victim had already collapsed, the rapist allowed her to go outside for a smoke. She was then released saying, "I've had enough of you. Pack your things and leave." They put a bag over her head, took her to a vacant lot, and dumped her there. Zhenya turned out to be a desperate girl. As soon as she returned, she went to the police. She took a friend with her who had also been victimized by these perverts. "Why didn't you report this before?" The policeman wondered. "Well, we're prostitutes," the girls sighed. "Who will save us?" Then the search for the criminals began. Lugovoy's roommate, Yekaterina Ustinova, played a rather strange role in the whole story. For at least a year she watched the madness in the house, but kept silent. Everything Lugovoy did with the girls, he tried out on Ustinova, says a senior police officer. Then Ustinova got older, and she and Lugovoy had a 10-year difference. She was older, and he wanted younger. Ustinova and Lugovoy met in the early 1990s and, as they say, they fit together like pictures in a puzzle. It turned out that they were both sex amateurs with a sadomasochistic bent. Lugovoy even left his family, abandoning his wife and daughter. Through Ustinova, Lugovoy met his future partners, who worked as car mechanics. Later, Lugovoy unofficially employed his new friends in his shipping company, paying them out of his own pocket for the errands they ran. It turned out that the whole trio was completely dependent on Lugovoy. For several years the merry company led a double life. To acquaintances, colleagues and relatives they were the same people. In the secret house, completely different. After sadistic orgies with prostitutes, the comrades returned to their families, and Lugovoy stayed with faithful Katerina. The gang of perverts was caught on April 1, 2002. Zhenya could not remember the way to the cursed house. Lugovoy's friends usually pulled black hats over their faces when they took the girls to visit. As a result, neither the former captives nor their pimps could find the robbers, although rumors about the killers spread throughout the neighborhood. But for some reason, they forgot to cover their faces. That's what ruined the enterprise. Suddenly, Zhenya recognized the grocery store. This is the same store where they bought vodka. Not finding the house, the policeman had already decided to return to the station. "Now I know where the house is," said Zhenya with joy in his voice. Lugovoy's comrades were arrested in front of the house. They were traveling in the very car that had taken Zhenya from the station. And Lugovoy himself was arrested in the house. When they searched the house, they found handcuffs, chains and 10 amateur videotapes. They showed 30 women who were there at different times. But only 5 women were found among them and wrote a statement to the police. One of Lugovoy's victims was a pregnant woman. After returning from the torture room, she lost her baby. If they killed someone, the body was never found. Also, most of the victims had probably already gone home, since the highway works mostly with girls from out of town. The rapists got 10 to 15 years. If they survive prison, they will be free in 2024. But Yekaterina Ustinova got off lightly. The court did not give her a sentence. She promised to wait for her lover from the prison. This story really struck me as a child. Be sure to write what you think about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. There are many interesting things to come.